Magandang araw, Podmates! Ako po si Howie Severino and welcome to another edition of our podcast where listeners can rediscover the beauty of their long attention span. I'll be talking today to a modern Renaissance man, landscape architect, environmental planner, urban historian, writer, photographer, drone operator, social media influencer, at marami pang iba. Paulo Alcazaren. Magandang araw sa iyo and welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, good afternoon. Maayong adlaw sa tanan.
I know this has been a pet peeve of yours na parang kulang talaga tayo sa parks and green spaces. We're probably up there in terms of having, the least green space, no, among all the countries in the world. Kasi kahit mga mahihirap na bansa, no, I think many of them mas marami pang green space kaysa sa atin, no. So how did we get to this point na yung kung may green space man, madalas private, madalas golf course, no? There's so little green space available for ordinary people to just stroll the way you can do in other countries.
Yeah, historically, Manila and Metro Manila, even in the post-war period, were planned to have extensive networks of parks and open spaces in the Burnham Plan of 2005, which was the template until 1940. There was supposed to be 4 large parks in Manila at various points with a total acreage of about 400 hectares or larger than Central Park in New York City. That's Harrison, Sampaloc, Santa Ana, and Tondo were supposed to have parks. And there were 9 playgrounds that were actually developed. So it's not that for lack of planning is that the government sold off all of these properties. In the post-war plan for Quezon City, again, 400 hectares of the Central Park defined by East Avenue, where you are, Tibong, where you are, East Avenue, West Avenue, North Avenue, defined the 400-hectare 4 triangles that was supposed to be a quadrangle of open space. Aside from that, in the 1950s iteration of the plan, there was an extensive park network of around the elliptical. So lahat na yan nawala dahil dinistribute sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno, and they've sold all of this. So you have all the 25 hectares left of the elliptical, about 30 of the Ninoy Parks and Wildlife, and the UP only has open spaces in a large metropolis. So Metro Manila has about less than 1 square meter of publicly accessible open space. And the metric target set by United Nations is 9 square meters per population. Singapore and Hong Kong is about 12. Hong Kong, actually, though you don't realize it, has actually more open space than Singapore. It's a little larger. So these places have so much more open space, and open space that is specifically designed, managed, and maintained as public parks, compared to Manila, which has the National Park Development Committee overseeing only Rizal Park, which is 58 hectares, and Paco Park. And yan na lang natitira from what was supposed to be a network of parks as planned in the 50s at the latest. So it's not for lack of planning. And taking this logic, you cannot blame private developers who have private land to develop every inch of space. Not all of them do, but it is private land. And more if you go around the world, it is public land that government either has or consolidates to achieve a balance of built and open space, built and natural environment, or networks of open space to address all of the problems that we have now. The rising temperatures in cities, the urban heat island effect because of too much concrete, because we don't have open space, the increasing air pollution because we don't have trees, the flooding of areas because we don't have the open space and greenery to absorb stormwater, and the lack of open space for the mental well-being of all citizens in the cities. Those are the reasons why we need open space.
I want to ask you about the Mount Kamuning footbridge over EDSA.
Yes.
Yung napakataas na pedestrian overpass na notorious na ngayon sa social media. Alam ko 2018 pa ito, no? Pero naging viral issue ulit dahil may foreign diplomat na nag-tweet ng picture with a caption, and if I may quote, the original tweet was in Spanish. Yung translation nito is, "There's no better way to make it clear to pedestrians that they don't matter." No, but I read a little bit about the history of this footbridge. It was built in 2018 because, according to the MMDA, the authorities, that spot was a very deadly portion of EDSA, and people were getting killed jaywalking there, trying to cross it kasi siguro malayo na yung pinakamalapit na ibang footbridge or crossing na mas safe. So the MMDA built the footbridge to give people an option. Ang problema nila when they were making it, they had to build it over the high tension wires of the MRT line, kaya naging mataas, at ngayon pinagtatawanan na ng lahat. So the other side of this issue, to be fair, this imperfect footbridge was built because on the one hand, you could say the government cared about pedestrians kasi pwede naman pabayaan lang na masagasaan yung mga tumatawid ng EDSA, but it tried to build a solution, but it had to be that high for safety reasons as well kasi iniiwasan din yung wires ng MRT na nandun na. Hindi mo naman pwedeng tanggalin yung mga wires at saka yung mga train na yun unless you had a much bigger rehab project. Pero anong take mo doon, Paulo? Is this are most people not seeing the bigger picture here of the Mount Kamuning footbridge?
Well, I agree. To answer in Spanish, creo que sí. But the first thought that came to mind when I saw it over Mount Kamuning is that we need to pass a law requiring all Filipinos to take up mountain climbing as a basic survival skill. And corollary to that, a new law that should ban all elderly and PW Filipinos from all pedestrian infrastructure. Basically, it's just telling elderly like myself and PWD to stay home. But seriously, it really is. Yes, you're right. It showed that they care, but they didn't care enough. It's a mistake that could only have been addressed in this way if you had just that limited budget that MMDA had. The only other corrective to that would be a pedestrian tunnel, albeit filled with a lot of problems of security. But that can also be addressed if the tunnel were big enough and wide enough and policed enough. The physical need to go over the tension wires cannot be bypassed. There's no way you can do that. The only other way is really tunnels, which is found in other places. If you are correcting a mistake that shouldn't have happened. So the very first mistake that they did when laying out the MRT line all along EDSA is to not realize, and there was nobody pushing for the need for pedestrian crossings every few hundred meters. In Singapore, the metric is about, the minimum is 1 every 500 in sparsely populated, 1 every 200 meters in more populated, 1 every 100 meters in city centers. So in the stretch of EDSA, madalang yung and even in places like Commonwealth, you have the same problem. But if you look at the total amount of money needed to build the crossings either above grade or below grade or as in tunnels, the cost of all of this infrastructure is still much smaller than the tons of money we are spending on car infrastructure. Just the bypass tunnel alone for the congressman in Batasan is several 100 million pesos. I think it was 300 million pesos If we're building these things for a bunch of our lawmakers, we can build it for everyone. So it's not a problem of engineering solutions. It's a problem of the funds, how much they really care about providing pedestrian-friendly infrastructure for everyone. So you find that in this current initiatives of the Build, it's still the same mistake of not integrating pedestrian access. I sat down in a stakeholders meeting for the MRT7 station in Quezon Elliptical Circle. And first thing I asked is, there's a station now in the middle of the park buried to minimize its impact. But how do people get there? And the engineers pointed to 2 small access points. I said, hindi kulang to. They didn't understand that when you build such infrastructure, you need to know where people come from and where people need to go. So, their motive is to profit for the ridership, but they're not making it easier also on themselves to get people, because they don't want to spend beyond the limits of their station. They really need to understand that people need to cross the elliptical road, which is a death sentence for most people, and get to the terminal. There's a small tunnel, but it's so small that you can't. There's so many people who use all of the government spaces, offices around elliptical. Government and local and national government are missing opportunities to provide transit-oriented, rational development around these stations, leaving it up to the private developers to make the money in forms of development that are not sustainable, which are the suburbs. And so it's really understanding that everything is connected and everything starts from the person walking as a commuter, to understand that we are all commuters. At the end of the day, we walk. When we get up, we have to walk even to our cars, and sometimes park far away. And we need to walk when we get to our destinations. So we are all pedestrians. Yet pedestrians are the number one not serviced by our build infrastructure.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino podcast, an original for GMA News and Public Affairs. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.